Get that kid out of here right now." The words cut through the park's air like a blade, transforming the peaceful atmosphere into a tense scene. A well-dressed, middle-aged blonde woman pointed furiously at a black teenager sitting calmly on a bench. She gripped her phone so tightly it seemed about to shatter. Her voice was loud enough to draw everyone's attention, but the boy, seemingly confused, just stared at her, unsure of what he had done to provoke such anger. Across the park, children played and couples walked their dogs, but everyone began to notice the commotion. The woman, later identified as Marion Smith, a resident of an affluent neighborhood in Stamford, Connecticut, kept shouting, "He's been here for hours, it's clear he's up to something. This place is for families, not people like him." Her disdain was unmistakable. The teenager, named Enric Anderson, could hardly believe what he was hearing. He was waiting for his mother to pick him up. Enric, a 15-year-old known for his calm demeanor and good grades, often spent weekends with his mother, federal judge Linda Anderson, one of the most respected figures in the region. Enric loved visiting the park, a place that brought him peace and fond memories. But that day he felt his world turning upside down. In her uncontrollable fury, Marion had already dialed 911. "Yes, there's a suspicious person in the park. He seems dangerous. You'd better send a car," she said, her description filled with prejudice disguised as concern. Meanwhile, Enric remained on the bench, motionless, his hands in plain sight, as his mother had always taught him. He knew sudden movements could be misinterpreted. Fear grew in his chest, but he tried to stay calm. Minutes later, police sirens echoed through the park. 3 patrol cars arrived quickly, their red and blue lights flashing. All eyes turned to Enric. The tension was palpable. He knew he had to be careful. He stood up slowly, hands still visible, and tried to explain. "Officers, I'm waiting for my mother. I haven't done anything wrong." But the police didn't seem willing to listen. Marion took the lead, gesturing fervently. He was here alone, lurking around families. "I told him to leave, but he refused." Her voice sounded like someone who believed they were saving the day. The police sergeant, a stern and burly man, asked for Enric's identification. Being a minor, Enric had none. He tried to explain again that he was waiting for his mother, but before the situation could escalate further, a distinct sound interrupted the moment. The roar of an engine approaching at high speed. A black sedan screeched to a halt in the parking lot. When the car door opened, a tall, imposing woman with confident steps emerged. Linda Anderson had arrived. Linda's arrival was like a silent storm. Dressed in a black blazer with her hair impeccably tied back, she walked with the authority of someone accustomed to high-stakes situations. But this time, it wasn't a court case demanding her attention. It was something far more personal. As the police and Marion watched in confusion, Linda ignored the woman and went straight to Enric. "Are you okay, son?" Her voice was firm but filled with concern. Enric nodded slowly, the relief evident in his eyes. He knew his mother would not only protect him but also resolve the situation exemplarily. Marion, initially perplexed, quickly regained her superior tone. "Who do you think you are interrupting like this? It's clear that boy was causing trouble and I—" Linda raised her hand, signaling she didn't want to hear more. Her piercing gaze made Marion shudder, her words dying in her throat. "I'm Linda Anderson," she began, turning to the officers and speaking with a calm that contrasted with the tension in the air. "Federal judge, and this," she pointed to Enric, "is my son. Now can someone explain why my son is being interrogated in a public park like a criminal?" The officers stood frozen, as if the ground had disappeared beneath their feet. The sergeant stammered, trying to buy time to formulate a response. "Your Honor, we received a call reporting suspicious behavior." Linda interrupted sharply. "Suspicious behavior? Waiting for his mom on a bench is now considered suspicious." As the sergeant tried to respond, Marion, still clinging to her stance as a concerned citizen, interjected again. "I was just trying to protect the families. This park isn't a place for hesitation." But the implicit meaning of her words was clear. Linda turned slowly toward her, her eyes blazing with indignation. "Not a place for what? For black teenagers, because that's exactly what you're implying, and I won't tolerate it." The silence that followed was deafening. Marion's gaze began to falter, and she stumbled over her words as she tried to justify herself. "No, I didn't mean that." Linda stepped forward, her presence dominating the scene. "When you decided to call the police based solely on the color of his skin, you weren't protecting anyone. You were acting on prejudice, and it's exactly this kind of behavior that turns simple situations into tragedies." The crowd that had formed around the incident was fully attentive. Some began recording on their phones, capturing every word. It was clear that Linda wasn't just defending Enric. She was educating everyone present about the destructive impact of racism. As Marion grew increasingly uncomfortable, Linda turned back to the officers. "I want to know, Sergeant, what measures you're taking to ensure your actions aren't influenced by biased calls like this, because what I've seen here today isn't police work, it's discrimination." The sergeant, clearly uncomfortable, responded hesitantly, "We follow protocols, Your Honor. There's no intention to discriminate." Linda raised an eyebrow and interrupted again. "Protocols? And do those protocols include approaching teenagers like my son without any concrete evidence of a crime? Do you realize what could have happened here today? One wrong move, one misinterpreted action, and this could have ended tragically." The crowd seemed to absorb every word, some nodding in agreement. Even Enric, who had felt small and vulnerable earlier, began to feel strengthened by his mother's unwavering presence. Linda, now visibly indignant, pointed at Marion again. "And you," she said firmly, "need to reflect on what you've done here today. Because your actions weren't just irresponsible, they were dangerous. You may not realize it, but your words carry weight, and today they could have cost you dearly." The woman lowered her head, unable to meet Linda's gaze. The crowd remained silent, the weight of the situation still hanging in the air. But Linda wasn't finished. She placed a hand on Enric's shoulder and, in a calmer but equally determined voice, concluded, "This isn't ending here. I'll make sure changes are made, both to prevent situations like this and to educate those who need it." Linda Anderson didn't waste any time. After ensuring Enric was okay and reprimanding Marion in front of everyone, she knew she had to act to ensure this incident wasn't just another case of prejudice swept under the rug. "Sergeant," she began, with an authoritative but controlled tone, "I want all the details of the call you received, the recording, the report. Everything will be forwarded to the Police Oversight Department for a full investigation." The sergeant hesitated, but Linda continued. Turning to Marion, who stood frozen, clutching her purse like a shield, she said, "You need to understand that your actions have consequences. This isn't just a park for people you deem appropriate. This is a public space, and my son had every right to be here. Your false accusation could have ended much worse, and I won't let that go unnoticed." The crowd watched in silence, absorbing every word. Some began to murmur among themselves, and it was clear public opinion was on Linda's side. Marion, for her part, seemed to shrink by the minute, unable to bear the weight of the situation she had created. "I was just worried," she finally murmured in a weak, trembling voice. "He didn't seem right." Linda took a step forward, her gaze fixed. "Worried about a boy sitting on a bench, or was it the color of his skin that bothered you? Because, frankly, nothing in my son's behavior justified your reaction. Nothing." Marion shook her head but said nothing more, seemingly unable to counter the force and logic of Linda's words. Meanwhile, Enric, still processing everything, observed the crowd around him. There was a mix of looks, some curious, some sympathetic, and a few clearly uncomfortable with the scene. He knew his mother was fighting for him, but he also felt the weight of being the center of attention. Linda then turned to the crowd. "To those watching, I want you to know that situations like this aren't rare. Black youth face this every day. They're judged by their appearance, criminalized without cause, and sometimes these interactions end tragically. This has to stop." The silence broke with murmurs of approval. An older woman in the front row nodded. "She's right," she said firmly. "I've seen things like this before. Someone has to speak up." Linda thanked her with a nod and refocused on the officers. "I hope everyone here learned something today. A person's skin color shouldn't define how they're treated, and I assure you, I won't rest until real changes are made, both in this community and beyond." The impact of her words was evident. The officers began to step back, clearly aware the situation was no longer under their control. Marion tried to leave discreetly, but Linda called her back. "Not so fast," she said firmly. "I'd like to speak with you in private." Marion reluctantly stayed, and the crowd began to disperse. Linda guided Enric to the car, but not before addressing the onlookers one last time. "Don't let situations like this go unnoticed. Record them, report them, educate those around you, because change starts with us." As they got into the car, Enric finally broke the silence. "Mom, do you think she'll really learn anything from this?" His voice was emotional, a mix of hope and doubt. Linda glanced at him through the rearview mirror as she started the car. "I don't know, Enric. But what I do know is that the world only changes when people speak up. Today, you were the victim, but you were also the voice that started something bigger. Never forget that." The black Corolla left the parking lot, but the impact of that scene would continue to reverberate. Linda knew this was just the beginning. She had plans, and none of them involved letting Marion or the police off the hook. That night when she got home, Linda sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and began writing a detailed report of what had happened. Every word was carefully chosen, because she knew she wasn't just fighting for Enric, she was fighting for all black youth who had ever been victims of unjust prejudice. Meanwhile, Enric went up to his room but couldn't sleep. He replayed the events in his mind, feeling a mix of relief and turmoil. His mother's firm presence had protected him, but he knew not all black youth were so lucky. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how things could change. The next morning, Linda called the city's legal department. As a judge, she knew she might face resistance, but she was determined to ensure Marion's false report was taken seriously. For her, this wasn't just about Enric. It was about holding those who perpetuated prejudice accountable. A few days later, Linda received a call. "Judge Anderson, this is the police department. We'd like to discuss the park incident." The voice on the other end sounded hesitant. Linda agreed to the meeting and arrived with an imposing presence. During the meeting, the police chief, visibly uncomfortable, tried to downplay what had happened. "Your Honor, we believe this was a misunderstanding. Mrs. Smith was just trying to protect the community." Linda cut him off immediately. Protect from what? From a teenager sitting on a bench? That kind of excuse only perpetuates the problem. "I want action, not words." She demanded mandatory racial sensitivity training for the entire police force and a review of policies regarding accepting reports based solely on suspicion. Additionally, Linda formally filed a complaint against Marion for filing a false report. Meanwhile, the story began gaining traction on social media. Witnesses at the park had recorded the incident, and the videos went viral. Linda's firm stance and Enric's vulnerability moved thousands. Community groups began mobilizing, using the situation as an example of the everyday racism that needed to be fought. Marion, now under public scrutiny, found herself at the center of a storm of criticism. Pressured, she reached out to Linda to apologize. Linda welcomed the apology, but made it clear that it wouldn't erase the harm done. "I hope this is a learning moment for you, Marion," Linda said, "because the consequences of your actions could have been tragic. This isn't just about my son. It's about everyone who's ever suffered from prejudice." That conversation marked the beginning of a new chapter. Marion was sentenced to community service in an educational program about racial bias. Linda and Enric decided to participate in one of the sessions where Marion had to listen to stories from people who had experienced discrimination. At the end, Enric also spoke. His voice was firm but emotional. "I hope everyone here learns something, because I shouldn't have to fight to prove I deserve to exist in peace. No one should." The impact was profound. Marion cried, promising to change her ways. Enric saw it as a small step in a larger battle. Over time, changes began to appear. The local police adopted the measures Linda had demanded, and the story inspired other communities to do the same. Enric, now more confident, began participating in school debates about equality, using his experience to educate other young people. "You've turned something painful into a platform for change," Linda told him during a family dinner. "I'm so proud of you." And so, a simple afternoon in the park, became the catalyst for something much bigger. Linda and Enric knew there was still much to do, but they also knew that every small victory was a step in the right direction. If this story has moved you and made you think, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and comment on what you thought. Stories like this remind us of the importance of challenging prejudice. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that challenge and inspire. See you in the next video.